Part II, sections 1 through 3 of All Things Are Possible by Lev Shestov. Translated by S. Koteliansky, 1888-1955. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Part II. Nur für Schwindelfreie. From Alpine Recollections. Section 1. Light reveals to us beauty, but also ugliness. Throw vitriol in the face of a beautiful woman, and the beauty is gone. No power on earth will enable us to look upon her with the same rapture as before. Could even the sincerest, deepest love endure the change? True, the idealist will hasten to say that love overcomes all things. But idealism needs be prompt, for if she leaves us one single moment in which to see, we shall see such things as are not easily explained away. That is why idealists stick so tight to logic. In the twinkling of an eye, logic will convey us to the remotest conclusions and forecasts. Reality could never overtake her. Love is eternal, and consequently a disfigured face will seem as lovely to us as a fresh one. This is, of course, a lie, but it helps to preserve the old tastes and obscures danger. Real danger, however, was never dispelled by words. In spite of Schiller and eternal love, in the long run vitriol triumphs, and the agreeable young man is forced to abandon his beloved and acknowledge himself a fraud. Light, the source of his life and hope, has now destroyed hope and life for him. He will not return to idealism, and he will hate logic. Light, that seemed to him so beautiful, will have become hideous. He will turn to darkness, where logic and its binding conclusions have no power, but where the fancy is free for all her vagaries. Without light we should never have known that vitriol ruins beauty. No science, nor any art, can give us what darkness gives. It is true, in our young days when all was new, light brought us great happiness and joy. Let us therefore remember it with gratitude, as a benefactor we no longer need. Do, after all, let us dispense with gratitude, for it belongs to the calculating bourgeois virtues. Do ut des, let us forget light and gratitude, and the qualms of self-important idealism. Let us go bravely to meet the coming night. She promises us great power over reality. Is it worth while to give up our old tastes and lofty convictions? Love and light have not availed against vitriol. What a horror would have seized us at the thought, once upon a time. That short phrase can annul all Schiller. We have shut our eyes and stopped our ears. We have built huge philosophic systems to shield us from this tiny thought. And now it seems we have no more feeling for Schiller and the great systems. We have no pity on our past beliefs. We now are seeking for words with which to sing the praises of our former enemy. Night, the dark, deaf, impenetrable night, peopled with horrors, does she not now loom before us, infinitely beautiful? Does she not draw us with her still, mysterious, fathomless beauty, far more powerfully than noisy, narrow day? It seems as if in a short while man will feel that the same incomprehensible, cherishing power which threw us out into the universe and set us, like plants, to reach to the light, is now gradually transferring us to a new direction, where a new life awaits us with all its stores. Fata volentem ducunt, nolentem trahunt. And perhaps the time is near when the impassioned poet, casting a last look to his past, will boldly and gladly cry, "Hide thyself, sun! O darkness, be welcome!" 2. Psychology at last leads us to conclude that the most generous human impulses spring from a root of egoism. Tolstoy's love to one's neighbour, for example, proves to be a branch of the old self-love. The same may be said of Kant's idealism and even of Plato's. Though they glorify the service of the idea, in practice they succeed in getting out of the vicious circle of egoism no better than the ordinary mortal, who is neither a genius nor a flower of culture. In my eyes this is almost an absolute truth. It is never wrong to add the retractive almost. Truth is too much inclined to exaggerate its own importance, and one must guard oneself against its despotic authority. Thus all men are egoists. Hence follows a great deal. I even think this proposition might provide better grounds for metaphysical conclusions than the doubtful capacity for compassion and love for one's neighbour, which has been so tempting to dogma. For some reason men have imagined that love for oneself is more natural and comprehensible than love for another. Why? Love for others is only a little rarer, less widely diffused than love to oneself. But then hippopotami and rhinoceros, even in their own tropical regions, are less frequent than horses and mules. Does it follow that they are less natural and transcendental? Positivism is not incumbent upon bloodthirsty savages. Nay, as we know, many of them are less positive-minded than our learned men. For instance, a future life is to them such an infallible reality that they even enter into contracts, part of which is to be fulfilled in the next world. A German metaphysician won't go as far as that. Hence it follows that the way to know the other world is not by any means through love, sympathy and self-denial, as Schopenhauer taught. On the contrary, it appears as if love for others were only an impediment to metaphysical flights. Love and sympathy chain the eye to the misery of this earth, where such a wide field for active charity opens out. The materialists were mostly very good men, a fact which bothered the historians of philosophy. They preached matter, believed in nothing, and were ready to perform all kinds of sacrifices for their neighbours. How is this? It is a case of clearest logical consequence. Man loves his neighbour, he sees that heaven is indifferent to misery, therefore he takes upon himself the role of providence. Were he indifferent to the sufferings of others, he would easily become an idealist and leave his neighbours to their fate. Love and compassion kill belief, and make a man a positivist and a materialist in his philosophical outlook. If he feels the misery of others, he leaves off meditating and wants to act. Man only thinks properly when he realizes he has nothing to do, his hands are tied. That is why any profound thought must arise from despair. Optimism, on the other hand, the readiness to jump hastily from one conclusion to another, may be regarded as an inevitable sign of narrow self-sufficiency, which dreads doubt and is consequently always superficial. If a man offers you a solution of eternal questions, it shows he has not even begun to think about them. He has only acted. Perhaps it is not necessary to think. Who can say how we ought or ought not to live? And how could we be brought to live as we ought, when our own nature is and always will be an incalculable mystery? There is no mistake about it. Nobody wants to think. I do not speak here of logical thinking. That, like any other natural function, gives man great pleasure. For this reason, philosophical systems, however complicated, arouse real and permanent interest in the public, provided they only require from man the logical exercise of the mind and nothing else. But to think, really to think, surely this means a relinquishing of logic. It means living a new life. It means a permanent sacrifice of the dearest habits, tastes, attachments, without even the assurance that the sacrifice will bring any compensation. Artists and philosophers like to imagine the thinker with a stern face, a profound look which penetrates into the unseen, and a noble bearing, an eagle preparing for flight. Not at all. A thinking man is one who has lost his balance, in the vulgar, not in the tragic sense. Hands raking the air, feet flying, face scared and bewildered, he is a caricature of helplessness and pitiable perplexity. Look at the aged Turgenev, his poems and prose, and his letter to Tolstoy. Maupassant thus tells of his meeting with Turgenev: "There entered a giant with a silvery head." Quite so. The majestic patriarch and master, of course. The myth of giants with silver locks is firmly established in the heart of man. Then suddenly enters Turgenev in his prose poems, pale, pitiful, fluttering like a bird that has been winged. Turgenev, who has taught us everything, how can he be so fluttered and bewildered? How could he write his letter to Tolstoy? Did he not know that Tolstoy was finished, the source of his creative activity dried up, that he must seek other activities? Of course he knew. And still he wrote that letter. But it was not for Tolstoy, nor even for Russian literature, which, of course, is not kept going by the deathbed letters and covenants of its giants. In the dreadful moments of the end, Turgenev, in spite of his noble size and silver locks, did not know what to say, or where to look for support and consolation. So he turned to literature, to which he had given his life. He yearned that she, whom he had served so long and loyally, should just once help him, save him from the horrible and thrice senseless nightmare. He stretched out his withered, numbing hands to the printed sheets which still preserved the traces of the soul of a living, suffering man. He addressed his late enemy Tolstoy with the most flattering name: "Great writer of the Russian land." Recollected that he was his contemporary, that he himself was a great writer of the Russian land. But this he did not express aloud. He only said, "I can no longer." He praised a strict school of literary and general education. To the last he tried to preserve his bearing of a giant with silvery locks, and we were gratified. The same persons who are indignant at Gogol's correspondence quote Turgenev's letter with reverence. The attitude is everything. Turgenev knew how to pose passably well, and this is ascribed to him as his greatest merit. Mundus vult decipi, ergo decipiatur. But Gogol and Turgenev felt substantially the same. Had Turgenev burnt his own manuscripts and talked of himself instead of Tolstoy before death, he would have been accounted mad. Moralists would have reproached him for his display of extreme egoism. And philosophy? Philosophy seems to be getting rid of certain prejudices. At the moment when men are least likely to play the hypocrite and lie to themselves, Turgenev and Gogol place their personal fate higher than the destinies of Russian literature. Does not this betray a secret to us? Ought we not to see in absolute egoism an inalienable and great, yes, very great quality of human nature? Psychology, ignoring the threats of morality, has led us to a new knowledge. Yet still, in spite of the instances we have given, the mass of people will, as usual, see nothing but malice in every attempt to reveal the human impulses that underlie lofty motives. To be merely men seems humiliating to men. So now malice will also be detected in my interpretation of Turgenev's letter, no matter what assurance I offer to the contrary. 3. On method. A certain naturalist made the following experiment. A glass jar was divided into two halves by a perfectly transparent glass partition. On the one side of the partition he placed a pike, on the other a number of small fishes, such as formed the prey of the pike. The pike did not notice the partition, and hurled itself on its prey, with, of course, the result only of a bruised nose. The same happened many times, and always the same result. At last, seeing all its efforts ended so painfully, the pike abandoned the hunt, so that in a few days, when the partition had been removed, it continued to swim about among the small fry without daring to attack them. Does not the same happen with us? Perhaps the limits between this world and the other world are also essentially of an experimental origin, neither rooted in the nature of things, as was thought before Kant, or in the nature of our reason, as was thought after Kant. Perhaps indeed a partition does exist, and make vain all attempts to cross over. But perhaps there comes a moment when the partition is removed. In our minds, however, the conviction is firmly rooted that it is impossible to pass certain limits, and painful to try, a conviction founded on experience. But in this case we should recall the old scepticism of Hume, which idealist philosophy has regarded as mere subtle mind play, valueless after Kant's critique. The most lasting and varied experience cannot lead to any binding and universal conclusion. Nay, all our a priori, which are so useful for a certain time, become sooner or later extremely harmful. A philosopher should not be afraid of scepticism, but should go on bruising his jaw. Perhaps the failure of metaphysics lies in the caution and timidity of metaphysicians, who seem ostensibly so brave. They have sought for rest, which they describe as the highest boon. Whereas they should have valued more than anything restlessness, aimlessness, even purposelessness. How can you tell when the partition will be removed? Perhaps at the very moment when man ceased his painful pursuit, settled all his questions and rested on his laurels inert, he could with one strong push have swept through the pernicious fence which separated him from the unknowable. There is no need for man to move according to a carefully considered plan. This is a purely aesthetic demand which need not bind us. Let man senselessly and deliriously knock his head against the wall. If the wall go down at last, will he value his triumph any the less? Unfortunately for us, the illusion has been established in us that plan and purpose are the best guarantee of success. What a delusion it is! The opposite is true. The best of all that genius has revealed to us has been revealed as the result of fantastic, erratic, apparently ridiculous and useless, but relentlessly stubborn seeking. Columbus, tired of sitting on the same spot, sailed west to look for India. And genius, in spite of vulgar conception, is a condition of chaos and unutterable restlessness. Not for nothing has genius been counted kin to madness. Genius flings itself hither and thither because it has not the Sitzfleisch necessary for industrious success in mediocrity. We may be sure that earth has seen much more genius than history has recorded, since genius is acknowledged only when it has been serviceable. When the tossing about has led to no useful issue, which is the case in the majority of instances, it arouses only a feeling of disgust and abomination in all witnesses. He can't rest, and he can't let others rest. If Lermontov and Dostoevsky had lived in times when there was no demand for books, nobody would have noticed them. Lermontov's early death would have passed unregretted. Perhaps some settled and virtuous citizen would have remarked, weary of the young man's eternal and dangerous freaks, for a dog's death. The same of Gogol, Tolstoy, Pushkin. Now they are praised because they left interesting books. And so we need pay no attention to the cry about the futility and worthlessness of scepticism, even scepticism pure and unadulterated, scepticism which has no ulterior motive of clearing the way for a new creed. To knock one's head against the wall out of hatred for the wall, to beat against established and obstructive ideas because one detests them, is it not an attractive proposition? And then, to see ahead uncertainly and limitless possibilities, instead of up-to-date ideals, is not this too fascinating? The highest good is rest. I shall not argue. De gustibus aut nihil aut bene. By the way, isn't it a superb principle? And this superb principle has been arrived at perfectly by chance. Unfortunately not by me, but by one of the comical characters in Tchekhov's Seagull. He mixed up two Latin proverbs, and the result was a splendid maxim, which in order to become an a priori, awaits only universal acceptance. End of part 2, section 3, recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine.